My name is Robyn. This is my front of house salon. Thank you very much to Sherka asking me to do this, and to Dara for organising it and for the incentive to clean my room. So this is a story called The Pheasant, and it's about a pheasant, as you'll see. Okay. When I was younger, I liked to dig holes. I loved the satisfaction of digging my shovel into the soil over and over, flinging dirt over my shoulder and scattering it over my mum's flowers. My aim was to dig a hole so big that I could build myself a little house inside it. Secret lair under the grass. Imagine walls of smoothed soil, chairs constructed from the earth, a whole world beneath the surface of my garden. I didn't mind dirt. I didn't mind it caked beneath my fingernails, staining my clothes, covering my shoes. I had a shovel with a yellow handle that looked just like a shovel for adults, except that it was smaller. The handle fit neatly between my closed fist. I spent hours digging. The next day, the hole I made would have disappeared, the ground even, and I would start from scratch. My parents told me that that was what happened to the garden overnight. Holes filled in, dirt poured back to where it came from. It was only when I was a teenager that I realised my dad used to fill in the holes while I was asleep. He wanted to protect the garden from me and my intense desire to dig. The last time I ever dug a hole in the garden was with my parents. After that incident, I was afraid to go digging there again, afraid of what I might find. I was 8 years old. It was the first time that my parents ever asked me to tell a lie, ever told me that it was okay to do so. It was my first close encounter with death. The first time I felt its feathers brush against my skin, smelt its stench seeping into my nostrils. It was a bright October day, and my great uncle Jim called over unexpectedly. He only ever really called over unexpectedly. He never came to the family occasions we invited him to, though we always left a place for him at the dinner table just in case he showed up late. He came to my brother's communion party exactly on time, but the day after it happened. He even brought a card with money inside, strange and large coins that neither of us recognised. I liked my great uncle Jim. He wore big sturdy boots and heavy shirts, and had a distinct smell which reminded me of a dark shade of green. He had a passion for hunting which both fascinated and terrified me. Once he let me hold his rifle. I ran my fingers over its gleaming surface, feeling its heaviness in my arms. It looked a bit like the toy guns that some of my friends had, except it was big, with real polished wood instead of flimsy plastic. I still remember my mum's face when she found me perched on Jim's knee, pressing the cool metal against the skin of my cheek. He promised that when I was older he would take me hunting with him, but I was relieved by my parents' protests. It was fun to hold the gun in the hallway, but I didn't like to imagine it pointed at a bird in the sky, the ensuing bang, a flurry of falling feathers. That autumn day, Jim called to our house with a pheasant slung over his shoulder. My brother and I ran out of our room when we heard the doorbell, hoping it would be someone exciting. We stopped midway down the stairs and we saw Jim in his large boots with his large bird. He presented it to my mum, whose feigned pleasure seemed to be convincing enough to satisfy him. He smiled and declined our offer to come in for a cup of tea. They chatted for a while in the hallway, while my mum stood cradling the pheasant in her arms like a baby, her white knuckles clutching at the feathers. My dad did most of the talking, his eyes drawn inadvertently towards the bird, glances that punctuated each sentence he uttered. They talked about the weather, touched on the current political situation in a vague, disapproving way, and I wasn't sure if they were agreeing with each other or not. My brother and I sat on the stairs, silently transfixed. Then, as suddenly as he arrived, Uncle Jim waved up at us and said goodbye, heading on to God knows where, perhaps to deliver more pheasants. He never really told you where he was going, or where he was coming from. "Let me know how you find it," he called as he closed our front door behind him and went whistling down the street. My parents stared at each other, stunned, taking the occasional timid glance at the pheasant, as if hoping they might look back and find that it had disappeared. Eventually, they left on the kitchen table and told us not to touch it or let the dog anywhere near it, for God's sake. We only waited a few minutes before sneaking into the kitchen, closing the door firmly behind us and staring at it, speculating about its age and name in low voices. I was both amazed and appalled by it. The colour of its feathers, its beak, its claws, the heavy weight of death slung across our kitchen table. I overheard my parents' hushed conversations, talk of plucking, fears of blood and entrails consuming the kitchen. My dad insisted that there was no way he was going to eat that thing. Well, my mum said, what on earth are we going to do with it? I was complicit in the crime that occurred. I had always loved digging, but I had never dug a grave before. That evening, after dinner, frozen pizza that we ate perched on our laps in the sitting room, my brother and I were building a pillow fort in our bedroom. I was on the top bunk, tucking a sheet under the boards of the bed so it would drape down and conceal us from the world. Underneath, my brother tossed pillows into the air and let them fall on his face. I glanced at the window and saw my parents in the garden, the pheasant at their feet, the light fading around them. We watched them for a moment, wondering what we were witnessing. My dad picked up a shovel and began to dig. We raced down the stairs and out into the garden. We demanded to be included in the operation. They looked at each other. My mum shrugged. I went to get my shovel. We dug in silence, while the pheasant lay in the grass, dampening with the evening dew. I kept glancing over at it, the patch of red around its eyes that I imagined might be dried blood caked into the feathers. My heart was beating fast in the descending darkness, shovel against soil again and again as the dog whined and scratched at the back door. I liked the rhythm of digging. My brother and I tried to keep pace with my parents in our own sections of the hole. My mum's begonias, that she'd been so precious about previously, were sacrificed for the act, tossed aside, a mound of pink and petals, accidental adornment for the grave. When the hole was done, I stood in its depths and the sides were level with my palms. It was night at this stage, dark except for the stars speckled across the sky, the light spilling out from the windows of the house. The pheasant was an indistinguishable silhouette, a lump on the ground, its vibrant feathers reduced to monotone. My mum made us stand back as my dad picked it up and laid it gently at the bottom of our hole, at rest amongst the loosened soil and worms and the tiny roots that filled the earth like capillaries. We stared down at it for a moment, eyes straining in the dark. My mum said to hurry up, it was getting too cold to be outside. We heaped the soil back on top of the bird, scooping it up with our shovels and letting it fall, scattered on the feathers and then eventually concealing it completely. I could see my breath like smoke in the night air. The hole, which seemed immense, which had taken us what felt like hours to dig, disappeared quickly. Only a flowerless patch in the garden was left, where the soil was freshly turned, where we watched the little robin swoop down the next morning, picking happily at the worms exposed near the surface. Inside, our muddy shoes were discarded at the back door. We wondered what we'd say if Jim called around again. My dad proposed blaming the dog, planning a tale of chaos and carnage, a guilty snout covered in blood and feathers. My mum worried that would display a carelessness with the bird, who should have been hung carefully, like one of her nice dresses, far out of reach of the dog. They eventually decided that the only option was to tell him that we had eaten it, and began to pool their knowledge of pheasant preparation in order to ensue a convincing credibility when my Uncle Jim asked about them. Feathers, of course, had been plucked carefully. An excavation of the pellets had occurred, scouring the flesh for bullet holes and removing them, a surgical operation. My dad wanted to take credit for this part, perhaps to impress his uncle, although I knew that in reality he probably would have vomited in the kitchen sink. And then there was talk of innards and gizzards, and I wondered what size the bird's heart would have been, what it would have felt like if my mum had removed it from its body and allowed me to hold it in the palm of my hand. We were complicit in the crime and complicit in concealing it. Told what day we had eaten it, what with. It was decided that I had liked the flavour, that my brother had been surprised by the texture. I practiced the lie out loud, just in case Jim called over unexpectedly, pounced on us mid-conversation, and demanded answers about the fine pheasant he had gifted us. Gradually, though, the lie faded from my head, as each day passed with no sign of him at the door. My great-uncle Jim died a few months later. It was the first time I'd ever been to a funeral, experienced the smell of the incense in the church, the drone of the priest, the stifled excitement of seeing so many of my cousins in one place. My parents made me wear the navy dress that they bought me for Christmas, and I hated the feeling of the tights against my skin. I watched my dad and his brothers carry the coffin, the tight grip of hands on suited shoulders, the solemn strain of their bodies. I couldn't get the image of us frantically digging in the garden out of my head, and I kept wanting to laugh as the priest conducted the responsorial plan. He spoke about the dead always watching over us, always being present, and I wondered if in death, in this new state of being, my great-uncle Jim had acquired the rider vision to know what we had done. I wondered if he was angry or was laughing at the thought of the pheasant rotting in the ground like he soon would be. In the graveyard, I watched them lower the coffin into the earth, the men dressed in black tossing the mounds of soil back on top of it. The hole for the grave was bigger than any hole I had ever dug myself, and I wished I had witnessed them do it, seen if they had extra large shovels to dig an extra large hole. I wanted to help them with their digging, help them with their burying. I wanted to take handfuls of soil and press it in my fist, compress it tight against my palm and fingers. I wanted to tell him how we had buried Uncle Jim's pheasant and pressed the earth back down on top of it, covering it forever, until perhaps in many years some other child who loved digging in the garden might stumble across a carcass or scattered bones and wonder what strange and wonderful creature they had come from. I feel like I mispronounced a lot of words in that, but I'm not going to re-record it because it's getting really dark. It's the evening time. Oh, it's not finished, okay. And my dog is barking in the background, I don't know if you can hear it. I might just wait till he stops. Romeo sings the streets a serenade, playing everybody low with a love song that he made. Finds the streetlight, steps out of the shade, says something like, "You and me, babe, how about it?" Juliet to say it's Romeo nearly gave me a heart attack. He's underneath the window singing, "Hey yo, my boyfriend's back." Shouldn't come around here singing up at people like that. Anyway, what you gonna do about it? Juliet, the dice was loaded from the start, and I bet back, and you exploded in my heart, and I forget the movie song. When you gonna realize it was just the time was wrong, Juliet? Grew up on different streets, both streets of shame, both dirty, both mean, 'cause the dream was just the same. Dreamed your dream for you, and now your dream is real. How can you look at me as if it was just another one of your deals? You can fall for chains of silver, you can fall for chains of gold, you can fall for pretty strangers and the promises they hold. Promise you everything, I promise you thick and thin, yeah. I just say Romeo, yeah, I used to have a scene with you. Juliet, when we made love you used to cry. You said I love you like the stars above, I love you till I die, and there's a place for us. You know the movie song. When you gonna realize it was just the time was wrong, Juliet? And I can't do the talk like they talk on the TV, and I can't do a love song like the way it's meant to be. I can't do anything but do anything for you. I miss you and the way we used to be. And all I do is keep the beat and bad company. And all I do is kiss you through the bars of a rhyme. Juliet, I do the stars with you anytime. Juliet, when we made love you used to cry. You said I love you like the stars above, I love you till I die. And there's a place for us, you know the movie song. When you're gonna realize it was just the time was wrong. Juliet, the love-struck Romeo sings the streets a serenade, playing everybody low, little love song that he made. Finds the streetlight, steps out of the shade, says something like, you and me, babe, how about